Kia ora. Good morning and welcome to this time as togetherish as we can get at this stage. It's good to be making contact and connecting anyway this morning, isn't it? I hope things are going well for you and you're managing your masks and all those other things we need to be doing in these times. Today we come to the end of the Moses story. Next week, a couple of people are going to share their reflections on the story, and then we're going to move on into some other things. We hope you've enjoyed the journey through this most interesting of times and with a most interesting character. As much as it has been a good story to tell, we've tried to use the insights it gives into the world in which Moses lived to help us make some sense of the strange times we find ourselves living in. We'll get a little deeper into that a little later on, but for now, let's start with a little bit of context. The book of Deuteronomy is the final book of the Torah, which is the Hebrew name for the first 5 books of the Bible. Torah means teaching, direction, guidance, and law, and this is where the story of the origin of the Jewish people is told. The Greeks referred to the Torah as the Pentateuch, which translates as 5 books. In this final book, Moses uses a series of speeches to explain the Torah, the story thus far, and to call on the next generation of Israelites to be faithful to the covenant that God has made with them. He talks about the previous generation and how, despite their rebellious ways, God did not abandon the promises made to God's people. Moses lays out again the agreement, the laws and standards that they will need to follow in order to fulfill and be faithful to their part of the covenant. And he finishes with the challenge to the Israelites to listen to and to love their God, the God who freed them from oppression and who led them to this place within sight of the promised land. If they righted the wrongs of their rebellious predecessors and remained faithful to the covenant, they would receive God's blessings. If they did not, then that would be to choose a cursed life. Moses ends his final speech with a poem of warning, a blessing, and then he walks up the mountain and he dies. Moses has brought the people through some amazing experiences. A reluctant leader, he's been open to God working through him to part the Red Sea, to escape the mighty Egyptian army, to draw water from a rock and feed people in the desert, receive and pass on the 10 Commandments, and then to wander around and around in the desert for 40 years because the people were impatient and untrusting, instead of the 11 days the journey should have taken. He has listened to them moan and complain, but more importantly, he listened to and trusted God because he knew that this mighty task of leadership was something he could not do on his own or in his own strength. He has done all of this, and now they are close to the finish line. They are close to the banks of the Jordan, within sight of the promised land, which in biblical times was known as Canaan, and now we know it as Israel. He can see it. He can probably smell it. It's within reach, but God has told him that the promised land is not for him, that he must charge Joshua with taking the people over the Jordan and into the promised land, the land promised for the tribes of Israel. He led the people all the way to the edge of his life's work, within sight of the promised prize, and that's as far as he could go. Can you imagine how that might have felt? To get that close and then to be asked to hand it over and let life go. I've been pondering on the why of this. This, like every step of the story, is no accident. Moses didn't just get old and wear out. God told him he was done and instructed him to hand it all over. And Moses responded as he has done all along. He listened, he trusted, and he obeyed. What an amazing end to an amazing life. But that still leaves me with the why question. Why end this way? I consulted some commentaries and I found most of the answers to this quite unsatisfactory, annoying even. It seems to me to be too trite to simply say Moses would not see the promised land because he'd got some things wrong along the way and God needed to punish him. Moses got no more wrong than any of us do, fairly regularly. So what does that say of our fate? Will God deny us the chance to live in the promised land too, if we clearly need to be punished for our occasional lapses into unfaith, disobedience, or lack of trust? Moses, up to this point, has been a most relatable character. He questions his own ability. He doubts his leadership. He worries for his people. He gets frustrated when they don't listen. We know this man because he's not so different from us. So, no, I can't see punishment as being the reason enough for the story of Moses to end this way. Nor, more importantly, do I believe in a punishing God. God is faithful, sticking to the path. It's us who waver around all over the place. The abiding image of God in the scriptures is that God is there welcoming us back, despite how annoyed and frustrated God might feel at our frailty and the fragile hold we have on our ability to keep our promises. God loves and invites us into that love and never bullies us or threatens us into love. Love draws us, invites and attracts us into its embrace. No one can be punished into loving, surely. Then I discovered a new perspective on the end of Moses' life, one that I found most intriguing. It came from what is called a Devar Torah, which I understand to be something like a reflection or a sermon written on a section of the Torah. In this, the author highlights the fact that Moses died still holding on to the promise. He died trusting that those he had journeyed with for so many years were about to enter a land flowing with milk and honey. He never had to know the reality of what happened once they got there. He never had to know that much of their previous behaviour continued as it had been, even in this new land. He died believing it would be better. Sometimes when someone dies a little earlier than we might have liked, we might ponder the possibility that they might have been spared some of the hard realities that end-of-life illnesses can bring. That thought can bring a bit of comfort to those mourning the loss. I can only imagine that concern for those left behind is very present for most of us as we near the end. We hope, don't we, for something better to come for those we love and have to leave. But we will never know, will we? We will never see what they will see after we're gone. But we lay down in hope, always in hope, for better things for those who follow us. Moses died still holding on to that promise. Last weekend, Martin and I planted 4 London plane trees along the front of our place at Tota Valley. These 4 new trees are to replace 3 huge oak trees we had chopped down earlier this year. The oaks were lovely mature trees, but they were seriously messy to manage, and we finally made the call to replace them. The plane trees are about 1.2 metres high now. It's going to be a very long time until they reach their potential. They look like spindly little sticks compared to what was there before. What we know for certain is that we won't get to see them in all of their glory. That hope I talked about before is why we still plant trees, knowing we won't see them in their fully mature state. We are aware too that sometime in the past someone else planted those oaks as a sign of hope for the future. They too were investing in a future they would not get to see. They couldn't know that sometime in the future their vision would be replaced by ours, just as our vision for the place will be replaced by someone else in a future we can't see. But for now, we sit with and invest in our hopeful vision for the future, which, when you think about it, is all we can ever do. I wonder if you have noticed, as I have, that there seems to be a lot of panic not far below the surface in our world at present. This panic and lack of hope in the future is driving many to a state of despair. That's also why we planted those trees. This was for us an act of rebellion against the lack of hope in the future that we see around us. Investing in the future is why we have children. We take that leap of faith in what is to come, even though we won't see them finished. We hope, if we are very fortunate, that we might live to see their children's children and maybe even a generation after that, but it's not a given. We invest in a future that we won't be part of. Like Moses, we have to let go and trust. That covenant promise that Moses tried so hard to hold the people to is for us too. We still have those same tendencies that the Israelites had, to hard-heartedness, to making and worshipping false idols, to choosing paths that lead to death and drain us of life. We still have that human impulse to wreck things. And despite all of this, God persists in God's faithfulness. As we have seen over the past few weeks, God was with Moses all the way, through all the bumps and trials, as God is with us. Like Moses, what we do is often an investment in a future that we won't see, but we still do it, because our story of God and the promises made give us hope in what's next. Giving in to despair should never be a Christian response, because we have a long story on which to rest, of trusting God's promises to bring new life. Yes, we are living in very strange and perplexing times, but we have very good reason to trust in what is to come, because we have history with a God who promises to never abandon us, despite our human tendencies to try and go it alone. We have very good reason to rebel against the tendency to despair that we witness around us, by living hopefully and responsibly, investing in a future we won't see. Choose life, as we heard last week, and live it fully and well. That's what I think living a faithful life is really all about.